Hello, everybody, and welcome back to You Exchange, the podcast where I exchange my user experiences to change them, and yours for the better. I'm Jeremy, a mentor and senior user researcher with over 8 years of experience and a background in neuroscience. Throughout my career, I've had the privilege of engaging with hundreds of users around the world. I've created this podcast with the aim of providing my mentorship and educational content, offering actionable tips, knowledge, and guidance in the realm of research to anyone having an interest in this area. And I hope that you will find this episode insightful. Hi, welcome back. I'm kickstarting this second episode in this series dedicated to note taking. If you haven't done so, I highly encourage you to go back and listen to the first one, in which I share some of my learnings when it comes to note taking, both as a student but also as a UX researcher. What I discovered trying to improve the process of note taking as a UX researcher in my past positions, in my past companies. I discovered in a nutshell that there are personas. We are all different when it comes to note taking, preferences, and practices. You might have thought when listening to the podcast, well, duh, yes, I would understand that. At the same time, I wouldn't have thought that it was that diverse, let's say. And I thought that usually there was one best way above all others, and I discovered that it was not the case. You must use the techniques and tools that you prefer and that you're most comfortable with. That being said, I then followed up with the idea of what you need to capture when you're taking notes as a UX researcher, for instance, but then we could adapt this to other professions. So as a UX researcher, you need to understand your users from several angles and from as many angles as possible. So the best is to take notes of, let's say, as many dimensions and sources of data as you can. And just as a side note, I didn't mention to take note of everything. That would be the case if you're one of the personas I cited before, like me in the past, when I like to take note of everything, basically. But the best would be to take notes of behavioral characteristics, nonverbal cues, and also what your participants said, of course. So that would be more or less what I would focus on. And in this episode, I want to cover, it will be a short episode, but I want to focus on some tools, technologies, techniques you can use when it comes to note taking. So let's dive right in. When it comes to note taking, the practice as user research has evolved over the years, and not only user research, when it comes to note taking as a whole. So we can map this from one extreme to the other, with the most left part of this extreme being taking notes by hand, and the rightmost part of this extreme, of this axis, being recording everything and then asking AI to summarize. And I will go over the pros and cons of each, my perspective, my personal point of view, and what would it mean for your activity as a UX researcher, but not only. So let me just share what I like to use most right now as my tools when it comes to note taking. I would say, like any good UX researcher or designer, it depends. It depends on the situation. So, for instance, I prefer note-taking boards such as Miro, FigJam. I don't know if you know about them, but imagine like a whiteboard, physical whiteboard, on which you can paste some stickers. Well, right now, there are some digital versions that exist. It's called Miro, FigJam, or Mural. You have several companies that do these tools, make these tools, and that makes it very flexible and easy to use because you can write really fast and you can click and create a new note really easily. it might need some proficiency on your side when it comes to using shortcuts, keyboard shortcuts that will dramatically improve your note-taking practice and your fluency, let's say. And so that's what I used to tell my mentees. Like, if you want to have a good note-taking tool, first choose a tool for which you will be able to, let's say, master even the small bits of it that might get in the way of you taking efficient notes. So, for instance, keyboard shortcuts. For instance, when I went from Miro to FigJam, the keyboard shortcuts were different, and that I didn't know. So when I dove right in to take some notes, well, some things unexpected happened, and so I was losing some notes, and I was losing time, and so on and so forth. So test the tool. As for anything, test the tool to make sure you understand it and that you are good with it. And so the good part of these tools is that they are collaborative. You can share ideas and you can write live. One thing that I really, really like is, first of all, when I run my interviews, and you can adapt that to other situations. Imagine you're a salesperson and you have someone else on the call while you're making a sale, and you want to record your process to make sure of what went right, what went wrong along the way, and what you can improve for the future, for instance. And so what can be good is to have someone on your side taking notes as you are speaking. And so a good thing to do is to have several monitors, and one of them you can dedicate it to just seeing live what is being taken notes about. And for me, right now, there is absolutely no tool to my knowledge, AI-wise, that does that can substitute a human taking hyper relevant and contextual notes of what you are saying and what the participant is saying. Right now, you can have transcription tools, you can have maybe automatic summary tools, but right now, I don't know of any tool that can take exactly relevant notes from what you need, because that requires several minds to collaborate and to share their ideas beforehand and to say, okay, when this participant mentions about blah, 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 I want you to take note on that, and so on and so forth. So right now, at least to my knowledge, but I would be happy to be proven wrong, by the way, because if you know of such tool, please let me know, because I would be interested in that, basically. So basically that's one of my favorite parts and tools, is to use a whiteboard, because then it's easy to debrief after the fact, and that's a part I will touch on in next episodes, about the debrief after you have taken some notes and why it's so important to debrief. In a nutshell, it's because a lot of things you are not able to take notes of them while you are in the meeting. And so a lot of the things are still in your memory right after the meeting, and that's the best moment to take notes of them, and also to debrief with other participants who were in the call. Because then, as time goes by, your memory of the facts that were shared will decline, and so you will progressively lose bits of information. I went through the error of thinking, oh, I will review this interview tomorrow and I will take notes of it after. It's absolutely not the same. So, like many great thinkers and writers, as I said the last time, the best part is when you read a book and you take notes right after, or after a passage, after a chapter, for instance, or when you listen to a talk and you take notes right after. Why? Because it will be hyper contextualized. You will think about some things at this moment and you will think about something else the day after. It has nothing to do taking notes a long elapsed time after, let's say. And so I would encourage you as much as possible to have your notes taken at right after, well, in the moment, and then when there is a debrief. So that was a side note, but I wanted to make it just to justify my point about the fact that I like these tools being collaborative, because it helps you to directly share to your to the other people who were in the audience what you took notes about, and that it's directly, let's say, helping you discuss about the points that you shared, basically. So that's one part, and that's one style of taking notes, the note-taking boards. And there are many other reasons. It can help you to cluster directly ideas by moving stickies, by relating ideas. Let's say that you close the gap between the note taking and the analysis. This is one aspect that I really love to talk about is, so everything is user experience, everything. Even your note taking aspect, as I said the last time, it's an experience. You are experiencing something when you take notes, right? And so you're using tools for that. You're using products for that. You are designing a process for that. The process is your product and you are the user of this product, basically. I hope I made my point across. But the point is, when you think about this process and this product you're developing and crafting just for yourself, for instance, or for others, you need to think about it not in isolation, but as a part of a larger process. So for instance, you taking notes is a part of a larger process of, let's say, acquiring customers, or of acquiring businesses, or interviewing users, and so on and so forth. It's part of a larger process. So think about the steps you have before, think about the steps you have after, and where does note taking take place in this process. So basically the parts that happen right after are linked to analysis in general. So that's why if you can close the gap between you taking notes and you analyzing those notes, that's the best, because you will save time, you will be more efficient, and so on and so forth. So for instance, I see a lot of people taking notes in Excel. That's good. If it works for you, great. For me, it doesn't work. Why? Because if I take notes in Excel, my notes are, well, in a spreadsheet, right? And so this is not visual. And for me to categorize my thoughts, this is not so visual. You can do it with columns. You put one theme by column for each column, and then you put your quotes below each column. I don't know. This is maybe something that is like not tangible, my explanation, but it doesn't work for me. I need to move things geographically around. I need to be able to not feel restricted when I move my ideas. I need to be able to create flawlessly, basically. And so that's why a board is really, really helpful for me, because I know that during analysis, this is what I would do. I will not analyze in a spreadsheet my qualitative information. I will analyze it in a board, because this is qualitative for me. And so that's my rationale. So as I know that, as I know my preferences, and as I know my process and what comes right after, I am trying to close the gap as much as possible between one step and the next by having these steps into the same space. And so that's why I prefer to take notes in a board than in a spreadsheet, for instance. So that was an example. I hope I made my point across. But another aspect that I like is basically taking notes in a blank document. So, and especially if the notes I'm taking are for someone who didn't loop me in. It can happen. Sometimes we are short on time, we don't have time, and we couldn't loop in our note taker. When that happens, and imagine I'm called in to participate to a meeting, and people say, okay, you will take notes. Okay, right. If I'm not being told about the agenda or whatever, I need to have a blank space. It can be a board as well, but I would do better with, let's say, a blank document, because I can take notes flawlessly. And I'm not thinking about structuring, basically. That's not the point. The point is really take notes, as many notes as possible. So that's one other aspect. For me, it works. And so that's why I said in the first episode, it's not necessarily about personas. It's not necessarily about who prefers to take notes in what way. Because sometimes, even if we have a general preference about a way of taking notes, it will depend on the situation. So even if I am the kind of persona who likes to take notes in a very structured way, in some situations it won't work. And so also think about that. So I really like to take notes in blank documents when I don't have an agenda. I really like to take notes on collaborative tools when I want to debrief with someone after. I really like to take notes. For me, one of the best of both worlds format is in a table. So the table can be in a blank document, imagine a Google Docs with a table, or in a Miro, in a FigJam, a whiteboard in which you have a table embedded. Why is it so effective? At least for me. I'm not saying that, don't take that as the Bible, but why is it so effective for me? It's because I can structure that. I can have a bit of structure and at the same time not too much. If I want to deviate from that structure when I'm taking notes, I can. Basically, how does that work? I have two columns. One column is basically the theme. You put here the theme that you expect to, let's say, take notes about. Imagine you're a salesperson and you want to gather, first of all, the needs of your customer. So you will have a column in which you will put themes, and one row of this column, the first cell, will be needs. And then there you capture all those needs that the customer is saying. Oh, I don't have an effective note-taking system, for instance. This could be your customer. Or I don't know how to acquire leads, and so on and so forth. These are the needs. Or you can have another theme that would be pains. I don't know, when I'm trying to eat more healthy, I oftentimes abandon by the third day because I cannot commit to one habit. That can be a reason, right? And so you can have pains, you can have process, behaviors, and so on. These are common themes in user research, but you can imagine it's endless, the possibilities of needs, right? And so that's why I like the table so much, because you can have themes on the left, something that will structure your thought and your thinking, and then you can put directly notes in there. And it's very flexible and easy to take notes in this format, because you just have to double click in the next cell and then take notes about that. And why am I saying that? Is because when we take notes, I felt that how can I say, the behaviors we are taking sometimes play against us. So basically, you will be able to drag and drop some stickies. You will need to double click before making that possible. And so a lot of very, very painful and small behaviors that can delay the way you type notes and make you less efficient. So it's really another activity. If you're a salesperson, your main activity is not taking notes, but it can be a part of it. And if you do it badly, it can hugely affect the way you make conclusions and drive actions. So that's why it's so important to think about all the tiny bits of behaviors you have to conduct. And so right now, as a summary, I would say the note-taking boards are effective for me for some situations. For some others, I prefer tables. For some others, I prefer blank documents. And then, to wrap up this episode, I wanted to talk to you about the environment you're in when you run interviews or when you take notes, and so on and so forth. And then you can apply these to various situations. If you're a student, if you are a professional interviewing someone else, if you're just a note taker at this specific moment. So, I'm going to talk for myself at the very beginning as a user researcher. So what does a user researcher do in terms of interacting with customers? Basically, we interview them, and when they talk, they sometimes share something on the screen. We also have a script. We have a dedicated script that we need to go through to interview someone, and it's actually very difficult to interview someone following the lines of a script. You can see that in, let's say, news, let's say on TV, when someone sometimes is being interviewed. They have a script, the person interviewing the interviewee. And sometimes it deviates a bit from the script and you need to redirect them. It's not easy. And on top of that, if you're on camera, it's even more complicated, basically. And so that's why I think it's a good thing for me. I really like to learn more about note-taking by being a user researcher, because now I can understand the pain of being an interviewer, basically. But if you're an interviewer and on top of that you have to take notes because you don't have the luxury to have a note taker, well, you have to think carefully about your setup. Because having only a laptop, for instance, it's not the same at all compared to having several monitors. So my point here being, imagine you have a script that you need to go through. You need to make sure you're not forgetting any topic. Imagine you're doing the interview remote and you need to see your customer or your participant, because you need to look at the camera to make it more human, basically. Imagine at the same time someone is taking notes for you, or you are the one taking notes. We can easily conceptualize the fact that we need at least 3 screens. Or I would say the very, very minimum is 2 screens, with one screen being like split in terms of windows. You have one half side of the screen being the note-taking part, for instance, and the other side being viewing your participant. That's an example, right? So that's how I see it, and it tremendously improves my way of conducting interviews. I already run interviews by the phone only, or only with the laptop, and I can do it. It's not at all the same, and you can directly feel it. And if you don't have a note taker and you only have, imagine, a phone, it's a phone interview, you need to record it. This is the only way, or you need to take notes by hand, or something else, or you need to have a laptop on the side. Basically, you need to have, basically, you have an input, you have outputs, you now have to monitor something at the same time. So think about all this. My only point is that you may not be in this exact situation, but you need to think about all this. I'm going to tell you about a story. Back then, when I was working in the automotive industry, at some time, so two little stories. The first one is I was running experiments with a simulator. This is not a secret. Automotive companies make use of simulators to be able to test some scenarios before making this live and before, let's say, releasing some new technologies on the market. They first need to see how does that behave inside of a simulator. What happens oftentimes, the physical environment, is that you have your participant inside of the simulator, and usually, not always, it depends on the situation, sometimes you're sat besides your participant in the car and you take notes beside the participant. That's one situation. But some other times you are completely in a different room and you can monitor them from a different room. And what separates you in between those rooms is a specific type of window, which makes it like you can see your participant, but the participant cannot see you. This is very important because if the participant can see you, sometimes there can be some, let's say, bias just by the fact of knowing how many people are taking notes or how many people are observing the situation. Of course, you will not behave the same way if you're in a room doing something and, first of all, you're alone or someone is observing you or 10 people are observing you. It can be disturbing, right? Even if you know it's for a study. And so we can already understand that the context will deeply influence the results. But also, it's also way more, at least for me, from my perspective, when I was taking notes in a different room, it's way easier for me to concentrate by being like monitoring the participant. It has its flaws because if your participant is completely remotely located from you, it's not at all the same. So it has also its biases. We have to take that into account. My only point is that you need to think about the context and that will impact the way you take notes. So that was one situation. My participant was driving and I had like 5 or 6 monitors. I was able to look at the road. I was able to look at the behaviors. I had a view from the top of the car going through the road. I had the view of, for instance, physiological signals, heart rate and the like, for instance. I had the view of my script, I had the view of my notes, and so that was an extreme situation, but it can happen. And that was really a great experience. And I can tell you about another situation. So I was inside of a car in a real situation and I had my participant in the front driving. And so here it was really funny because I became sick during the experiment because I was taking notes on my laptop while the participant was driving. So of course everyone could have predicted that I was going to be sick, and that happened. And so I was taking notes, physiological signals, I could monitor them, I was taking notes of the answers from the participant, I had my screen. And so even in this case, I had at least, I don't remember if it was 3 screens or 2 screens, but at least I had 2 screens inside of a car. So I had 2 screens inside of a car. And so there is no way you can get around that. If you're not using tools so that they can best assist you, you can do a terrible job at collecting data. So think about that. Your data is only as good as the tools you use to capture it, basically. And so that was another example of another setup, but in which I also adapted the use of my tools to make sure I capture data as much as possible. Also, some side notes before I wrap this up. Knowing your script will help you tremendously about conducting the interview flawlessly and taking notes in the best way possible. So I can tell you, sometimes I jumped into, and if you listen to past episodes, there is one episode I tell you that I don't know anything about the product and I still conducted the interview. In this specific case, for instance, the first interview was really, really difficult because I didn't know almost what I was going to ask next. And this doesn't matter, the level of seniority doesn't matter. It can happen to you at any time. If you don't know about the product, if you don't know about your script, you will end in this situation. Sometimes there are, of course, let's say, constraints that fall upon you, basically. But just know that. So by the first interview, I didn't know everything and I had to look at my script frequently, and that was maybe not so fluid. And by the 10th interview, let's say, it was way easier. I could think about the next question without looking at my script. So that will also help. And sometimes it even removes the need from you to have a script on a different screen. That's one part. And then, of course, think about some backups in terms of technology. Because if you're taking notes on some laptop, but imagine your app crashes, that's why it's so important to have note takers. And the luxury would be to have more than one, because if one of them, I don't know, something happens, someone rings at the door, whatever, you need to be able to have someone as a backup, or record the session if you can, whatever. Also, scribble down some notes if you can, even if you're the interviewer, or at least the time of the recording that is striking to you. Like, try to have several methodologies so that if something fails, you can back up. You can have another way of accomplishing the job, basically. So that's for note-taking today, but more related to the tools I use, the tools I like, my preferences. I hope it helps. Don't take that as face value. Of course, use the tools that you like the most and that you are good working with. In a nutshell, try to have backup as much as possible. Try to know your script. Use a setup that will help you to take efficient notes. And that's more or less it for today. I hope you learned at least one thing, as always. And in the next episode, I will move on with the next part, which I like very, very much, which is about how you can work with note takers. Imagine you're a user researcher and you need someone to take notes for you, or you're a salesperson, you need someone to take notes for you as well, or anything else. Well, how can you work best with them? How can you train them? How can you prepare them for this session? Before, during, after. So that will be the next part, and then we will talk about potentially at the end in another episode, templates, structure, how you can organize your notes, your thoughts, and so on and so forth. So like always, I, again, hope you learned at least one thing. If it's the case, please rate the podcast. Let me know what I could improve so that I can deliver you the best content. I'm striving to improve as much as possible, either by delivering you with content you expect and need, or by improving the quality, delivering you useful documentation and the like. Let me know in the comments or reach out to the links in the show notes. And until the next episode, take care. Bye-bye. And that's it for today's episode. Thank you everyone for joining me today on New Exchange. I hope you found today's episode insightful and valuable. Make sure to subscribe in order for you not to miss the next episode. Share it if you liked it and leave a review. Thank you for your time and attention. If you have any questions, comments, or suggestions for future topics, feel free to reach out directly to me. You can find all the details in the show notes. And see you in the next episode. Bye-bye.